There's one operation I never filed properly. Not because I forgot, because I couldn't. A man trusted me, and I let him walk into the jaws of the Stasi with his name still ringing in my ears. His name was Gustav. And no, you won't find him in your history books. They told us Berlin was the front line. Truth is, it was the waiting room for mistakes we weren't supposed to admit. I arrived with a briefcase, a fake name, and a smile I hadn't earned. They said I'd be doing important work, preserving balance, protecting democracy. I memorized those phrases like prayer. I even believed them. For a while, but the city had its own language. Cracks in the walls, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, friends who never said goodbye, just disappeared mid-sentence. It wasn't the Cold War that got to you. It was the silence afterward. You want to know what really happened in East Berlin? Fine, but don't expect closure. Don't expect heroism. Just know this: I carry his voice in the quiet. And sometimes it still screams. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. They sent me in with a new passport, a coded map, and a set of instructions that didn't explain much beyond survival. Langley never said why they chose me, but I had a feeling it wasn't for brilliance. Maybe they liked how quiet I was. Maybe I was just next in line. The plane landed at Tempelhof in a drizzle, and from the window, I saw the cranes assembling. The first slabs of what would become the wall. Nobody clapped when we landed. Nobody even spoke. I was housed in a gray apartment above a bakery that never seemed to bake anything. My contact was a woman named Lena, older than she looked, with eyes like broken glass. She gave me the key, 2 burner radios, and a phrase to memorize. Feldpost 1247 is off rotation. That was the kill switch line. Say it, and everything stopped. I remember my first walk through the Tiergarten. It looked like peace, smelled like wet leaves, but I counted 6 tails in 20 minutes. Russians, Brits, maybe even our own. In Berlin, you couldn't sneeze without a file being started somewhere. I kept my hands visible. I kept my words. Short dot, and came the briefing. You'll be targeting someone who wants out. That was it. No name, no reason. Just a voice on the tape recorder saying, East assets are shifting. Stay close to the university. I didn't sleep that night. The walls were too thin. Someone in the flat next door was typing slow, mechanical. Deliberate. The kind of typing that meant reports. About me, probably. I tried to look like I belonged. Bought cheap cologne. Carried books I never read. Nodded politely at tram conductors. But the truth is, even when you fake a life, some part of you starts to believe it. I began drinking espresso at the same corner cafe each morning, just to be predictable. Maybe that was the beginning of the mistake thinking I could build routine. In a place built on distrust, the first coded message arrived tucked in a copy of Der Tagesspiegel, slipped into my door slot at 5:23 a.m. No knock. No sound. Just a paper and a word underlined in red. Kragmer. That was the first time I saw his name. No context. Just that. Kramer. At the time, it meant nothing. A German surname. A dead end. But it would echo. Later, I reported the contact. Name to Lederer. She didn't blink. Physicist, East Berlin. He's trying to run before the Soviets pin him to their lab walls. Then she lit a cigarette and added, and if he's not trying to run, we'll make him want to. There was something off in her tone, not just command. Anticipation. I asked, why me? She exhaled slowly, didn't smile. Because you still look like someone people want to trust. Use that while it lasts. From that moment, My world shrank to university corridors, chemical journals, and the hope that a man named Kromer would show his face before the Stasi found mine. And he did. But that's another story. What stayed with me from those first weeks wasn't just the fear. It was the normality of it all. The way people hung laundry across bombed-out alleys. The way students laughed too loudly in cafes, as if microphones weren't stitched into the chairs. It was the illusion that life continued, even as the city tightened its grip. And yet, there was something about the air in Berlin. It never smelled clean. Always a trace of iron, of rot, like the city itself was rusting from the inside out. Learned quickly. Here, survival wasn't about being clever. It was about being forgettable, invisible, disposable. And I was good at that. His name was Gustav Krimmer. At least, that's the name that kept surfacing in the crosshairs of half a dozen intercepted communications. East Berlin physicist, once a golden boy of Soviet atomic research, now allegedly disillusioned and desperate. My job wasn't to believe the story, just to get close enough to know if it was worth turning into an extraction. I first saw him in a lecture hall at Humboldt. Thin frame, dark-rimmed glasses, voice like brittle glass. He didn't lecture, he warned. Energy without ethics, he said, is more dangerous than ignorance. The students clapped politely, but a man in the back slick hair, cold posture, didn't. I clocked him instantly. Stasi. Gustav had their attention already. I approached him a week later, pretending to be an American doctoral candidate working on a comparative study of nuclear models. He looked at me too long before answering, as if weighing my presence against something he'd already guessed. "You don't sound like a scientist," he said quietly. I smiled, shrugged, kept talking. Over the next few weeks, we met in cafes. That smelled of bad coffee and worse surveillance. He never ordered the same thing twice. He never let me sit with my back to the door. "Old habits," he said once. I didn't ask whose something about him felt rehearsed, like he was acting out a man who used to believe in something. But when he talked about decay rates or neutron dispersion, his voice lit up again. That's when I saw it. He missed the work. Not the regime, the work. That made him dangerous to both sides. Langley wanted a full psychological profile. I wrote. Instead, he knows he's being watched. He's still deciding who's less likely to kill him. It was the only honest line in a report full of technical fluff. I knew they'd ignore it. One night, he handed me a page folded into 4 parts, blank on the outside. Inside, a drawing of a bomb schematic with handwritten annotations. Not blueprints, not instructions, just ... theory. "They'll never let me leave with this," he said, eyes scanning the street. "But if I talk about it, I'm a threat. If I hide it, I'm a traitor. What does that make me?" I didn't answer. Because he was right. He never once asked if I was CIA. He didn't need to. There's a kind of exhaustion that binds men like us, people who know too much and trust too little. Sometimes it looks like camaraderie. Sometimes it's just silence. Gustav spoke about his sister once. Lived in Dresden. Didn't know he was planning to defect. "If they catch me," he said, "they won't shoot me right away. They'll make her watch first." His hands shook. He wiped them on his coat like it was just cold. I nodded, but deep down, I knew we were on a timer now. His desperation was starting to show. I filed a request for early extraction. Denied. Too soon. Langley replied, "Confirm intent. Monitor behavior." As if intent was measurable. As if this city hadn't already twisted us all into shadows. The worst part? I liked him. That's the problem with this job. You start off detached, focused, clinical. But then a man talks about his sister while chain-smoking over theoretical neutron flux. And suddenly, it's not just an asset anymore. It's someone whose voice you'll hear later, when it's too late to change anything. He wore a blue scarf the night we finalized the plan. Said it was his sister's, something to remind him of home. I remember thinking, don't wear it during the extraction, but I didn't say it. I should have. That's when I started to worry, not about the plan, about myself, because I wasn't sure anymore if I was helping him escape or setting him up to disappear. They named it Operation Friendship, as if the file needed a touch of irony. I was the academic liaison, a polite way of saying spy with a library card. My cover was a visiting scholar in atomic theory, sponsored by a transatlantic fellowship that didn't exist. I had forged letters, staged credentials, and a passport that smelled of glue. The mission was simple. Make Gustav trust me. Get him to talk about his research, his doubts, his fears. Confirm he wanted out. Then guide him toward a rendezvous where we'd disappear him westward, without a trace. Clean, surgical. They always make it sound that way in the planning rooms. I started leaving small breadcrumbs in our conversations, references to academic conferences in the West, researchers defecting to the U.S., postdoctoral funding. He never bit directly, but his eyes lingered when I mentioned Los Alamos. That's when I knew he was imagining something else. Not freedom, relevance. We met in a cramped reading room at the university. Too many busts of long-dead philosophers. Too many ears in the walls. Still, he started bringing me notes, loose pages with scribbled equations, not always coherent, sometimes torn at the corners. Just ideas, he'd say. Theories I no longer have a lab for. But I saw through it. He was testing me, seeing how much I understood, how much I'd steal, how far I'd go. So I played the role deeper. I began pretending I was frustrated with the American bureaucracy, that I wasn't really with Langley, that I hated protocol, admired thinkers like him, felt trapped by orders. I invented grievances to make him feel like we were the same. I was good at that. He opened up more after that, told me he wasn't alone. There were 2 other scientists thinking about jumping. I flagged it to Langley. They didn't care. Focus on Kregerer. Their response said, high value, rest or noise. But Gustav was afraid, not of the Stasi, of being used again. He didn't want to escape and just become someone else's lab rat. If I give you what I know, do I vanish? Do I get a name or a cell? He asked once. I lied. I told him he'd be welcomed, protected, celebrated. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of the lie I'd told worse, but because for a second, I wanted it to be true. We developed a code. Neutral, meaningless phrases buried in academic jargon. Phase decay stability meant we meet tomorrow. Magnetic oscillation error meant abort. Our drop point was the Tiergarten bench with the metal armrest shaped like a lion's paw. The kind of detail nobody notices, except people who are desperate not to be seen. I gave the operation its final push by staging a near miss. I pretended to be followed and fled our meeting point early. He watched me disappear into a side street. Later, I told him I had dodged a surveillance tail. It wasn't true, but it raised the stakes, made him feel like time was running out. The next time we met, he brought a folded handkerchief. Inside was a list of isotopic ratios and yield projections. They're trying to miniaturize warheads, he whispered. Not just for missiles, for suitcases. I didn't even flinch, just nodded and said, we need to move soon. Operation Friendship was working, but something in me was breaking, because with every layer of trust I built, I knew I was constructing a trap I might not be able to control, and I still don't know if I built it for him or for myself. The first time I saw the blue padlock, it was almost funny. Rusted, barely holding the door of an old gardening shed near the south edge of the Tiergarten. Someone had painted it sky blue unusual in a city where everything wore gray like a second skin. But it wasn't just decoration. It was a marker. Our signal dot. We chose it because no one cared about that shed. No windows, half buried in fallen leaves. It smelled like old iron and mold. Inside, shelves, empty jars, one cracked shovel, and silence. A perfect place to leave things you didn't want seen, or to be seen leaving. The rule was simple. If the padlock hung straight, all was normal. Tilted left, abort. Tilted right, proceed. Removed entirely, don't come. Ever. That signal meant someone was watching. For weeks, the lock played its part. Messages passed, microfilm left in cans of tobacco, notes inside chess books. Gustav never questioned it. Not once. That should have worried me. One morning, the padlock was gone. Not tilted. Gone. No scratch marks. No splintered frame. Just the door, slightly ajar, swinging with the breeze. I stood there too long. Long enough that an old woman walking her dog glanced at me twice. I walked away without looking back. That night, I didn't sleep. I checked the radios every hour, scanning frequencies we hadn't used in weeks. Nothing. No movement from Gustav. No fallback code. I started to believe he'd been taken. Then, 2 days later, the padlock was back. New. Same color. Same place. Hanging straight. No explanation. I asked Gustav directly. We met in a record store in Wedding, pretending to browse Western imports. He didn't look at me. Just muttered, "You weren't supposed to come that day." I asked why. He said nothing. Bought a Miles Davis album and left. I tried pushing the issue. Left him a note in our usual drop. Was it compromised? He replied with a single phrase, torn from a book on isotopes. Unstable, but repeating. That answer kept me awake for days. What did he mean? That someone was watching us, but hadn't. Acted? That the Stasi knew and wanted us to proceed? Langley didn't help. They reviewed my report and said, if he's still showing up, use it. Don't spook the asset. As if trust could be factory-reset. From that point on, every time I saw the blue padlock, I wondered, was it ours or was it theirs? The next signal was set for a Thursday. I walked to the shed an hour early, circling twice. Everything looked normal, too normal. And there it was, the padlock, tilted right. Proceed. Opened the door, expecting a note, a tape, something. Instead, there was a thermos, still warm. That wasn't part of our protocol. I left it untouched, closed the door, and walked away fast. Back at the safe flat, I waited until midnight before unscrewing the thermos. Inside, a piece of cloth soaked in coffee and a single Polaroid, blurry, black and white. A man entering a building. Gustav. But he wasn't. Alone, a second figure stood beside him, shorter, coat too big, head turned toward the camera. Van Doren. I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. Not yet. But I knew the padlock system was no longer ours. And Gustav wasn't just scared anymore. He was being managed. Crossing to the east was never routine. No matter how many times you rehearsed the story in your head. The guards didn't smile. The streets didn't forgive. And the silence behind every checkpoint was thicker than any wall. That night, Friedrich Strage was soaked in fog and false calm. I carried nothing but a dog-eared copy of Faust and a half-melted chocolate bar in my coat pocket props to make me look harmless. The rendezvous was set for 21 o'clock. A tram stopped 3 blocks from the river, just close enough to the Soviet sector to make anyone nervous. Gustav was late. 10 minutes, then 20. I stood by the kiosk, pretending to read transit schedules even, though they hadn't changed in months. When he finally appeared, he wasn't alone. A boy followed him. 15, maybe 16. Shabby coat, too big for his frame. Gustav gave me a quick nod and kept walking. I followed at a distance until we turned into a narrow alley lined with trash bins and broken bicycles. There, he stopped and said flatly, "This is Leo. He's my student." I stared at him like he just handed me a live grenade. "This wasn't part of the plan," I whispered. "He is the plan now," Gustav answered, not looking at me. Leo didn't speak, just looked down at his shoes. I saw bruises on his neck, faint but recent. I realized Gustav hadn't brought secrets that night. He'd brought someone he wasn't willing to leave behind. I should have walked away. I should have radioed in, called it a breach. But ID and single quotes T. Instead. I nodded and told them both to follow me. We made it to the safe house on the border of Mit just before curfew. Inside, Gustav finally opened his coat and handed me a small notebook wrapped in wax. "Paper. It's not much," he said, "but it's enough to get me killed." The pages were full of diagrams, warhead designs, placement calculations. Not perfect, but chillingly advanced. I asked where he got the intel. He didn't answer directly. People who thought they were invisible talked near someone who knew how to listen. Leo still hadn't said a word. He sat by the stove, rubbing his hands together. There was something in his eyes, something raw. It reminded me of young agents on their first surveillance op. Eager, scared, willing to believe in someone I didn't. Sleep that night. Every noise outside made me reach for the pistol I wasn't supposed to carry. I kept thinking, one extra body changes everything. Leo didn't have documents, no cover story, no extraction plan. At dawn, Gustav said, "We leave. Tonight, no matter what." I radioed Langley. The coded message I sent was clear. "Asset insists on bringing unauthorized minor. Risk elevated? Proceed?" The reply came 2 hours later. "Proceed without baggage. Confirm primary compliance." Baggage. That's what they called the boy. I didn't tell Gustav what the message said. Instead, I packed 3 coats, 2 forged passes, and a small compass that didn't point north anymore. Because that night, we weren't carrying secrets. We were carrying something heavier. The signal came at 14:17. A burst of Morse over the shortwave. Dash clusters that spelled out red code halt op. A kind of message that stops hearts. It was clean, properly formatted, used our latest cipher key. And that's exactly what bothered me, because we hadn't distributed that cipher yet. I double-checked the keybook. According to Langley, that key wasn't supposed to be in rotation for another 4 days. So either someone on our side had jumped the timeline, or someone else had gotten hold of it first. I didn't tell Gustav we were already preparing to move. The plan was to reach the tunnel access near Bernuer Strage, where an East German sewer maintenance shaft had been re-engineered by our people. Narrow, filthy, but functional. It would drop us out 2 blocks inside the British sector. The route had only been used twice, once with success. Once. Not so much. That night, the blue padlock signaled go. Gustav had the notebook. Leo had nothing but a fake ID and the scarf Gustav had given him. I had doubts and a gun I wasn't cleared to carry. We left the safe house at 20 o'clock sharp. The streets were unnervingly quiet. No patrols, no dogs, no lingering smokers at the corners. Even the tram sounded distant, like the city was holding its breath. Halfway to the tunnel entrance, I paused. A light in the building across from us blinked 3 times. That had been one of our fallback signals, but we hadn't used that protocol since February. I radioed to the safe channel. Static. Gustav asked, "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. We pressed on. The manhole cover was lighter than I remembered, almost too light. The bolts had already been loosened. Inside, the ladder rungs were dry. That was wrong. It had rained the night before. Still, we climbed down. No turning back now. I led, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. The tunnel smelled like oil and old blood. 100 meters in, we reached the junction point, a left turn toward the vertical shaft that led into the western zone. That's when I noticed it. A footprint. Fresh. Deeper than it should have been. Someone larger had passed here recently. Someone carrying gear. I told them to stop. Leo whispered, "What is it?" But Gustav already knew. He looked at me and said, "They're waiting." I had a choice. Turn back and risk running into a net above ground, or keep going and hope whatever lay ahead wasn't already triggered. I chose forward. Maybe that was my second mistake. We reached the shaft ladder. Gustav climbed first, then Leo. I kept watch, ears tuned to every drip and echo. Then a noise behind me. A clang, metal on metal. I turned, gun raised. Nothing. When I looked back up, I saw Gustav's foot slip. He caught himself. Leo was ahead, almost out. Then dash light. From the top of the shaft. A flashlight beam. Shouting in German. I screamed, "Down! Back down!" But it was too late. The signals had been wrong. All of them. And someone had been listening from the start. Van Doren was the kind of man who didn't sweat, didn't stutter, and never looked surprised. That alone should have made me suspicious. He was posted at our East Sector listening node, near Nordbahnhof, coded as Observer 2, tasked with tracking Soviet officer movements, monitoring East German logistics, and occasionally verifying safe house security. But lately, things weren't aligning. I started noticing the patterns. He rotated shifts too precisely, logged his surveillance reports too quickly. Every time I asked about Gustav's profile updates, he'd already accessed them, even ones I hadn't filed yet. When I asked how, he smiled and said, "The system's getting faster." That answer sat in my stomach like a stone. One afternoon, while reviewing comms logs, I noticed something odd. A phantom frequency pinged from our own relay point at the same time Van Doren had claimed to be off-grid. Cross-referencing the signal's path showed it had bounced through East Berlin before routing back to us. An internal echo, a loop. It was either a test or a leak. I didn't report it. Not yet. Instead, I followed him. I tailed him from the Nordbahnhof station through Invalidenstraße, expecting the usual stops: a pub, a coded drop point, maybe even a girl. But he turned left down an alley I didn't recognize, walked straight into an old Lutheran church that had been boarded up since '58, waited 30 minutes. Then I went in. The air inside smelled like mold and wax. Rows of collapsed pews, a single candle lit in the front. No sign of Van Doren. But under the altar, tucked in a crack in the stone, was a pack of cigarettes. And inside, a roll of microfilm labeled in Cyrillic. Back at the safe flat, I developed it using my field kit. The images were grainy but unmistakable. Blueprints of our tunnel access point. Surveillance shots of Gustav, and one of me, walking alone near the padlock shed. I couldn't breathe. Van Doren had sold us out. Or worse, he'd always been working for them. And we'd handed him every tool he needed. Our schedules, our signals, our fallback codes. I radioed Lenora. No response. Then I heard it. 2 knocks at the safe house door. The prearranged signal meant for emergency contact. It was him. Van Doren. I opened the door half an inch, safety on, pistol behind my back. "You've been running silent," he said, calm as ever. "I needed time," I replied. "You'll need more than that now." He handed me a folder. Inside, a copy of the extraction plan I'd submitted only hours earlier. "Just a heads up," he added. The British are getting nervous. Word is, there's chatter about an asset being burned. He left before I could speak. I checked the folder. The map had a red mark over Bernauer. Strange. They were going to ambush us, and he wanted M to know dot. It wasn't just betrayal dot. It was theater dot. And I was the star dot. We left just after sundown. The tunnel was still our only shot. Every other route had been burned, rerouted, or rendered suicidal. I didn't tell Gustav what I knew about Van Doren. I figured it didn't matter anymore. At that point, there was no safe way out, only less. Deadly Ones. Leo didn't ask questions. He just followed, clutching the scarf like it had power. We moved fast, hugging alleyways, watching rooftops. I had the silencer mounted and ready, just in case. But the city felt empty, like it was clearing its throat for something worse. We reached the manhole in 1942. Same entrance, same bolts. But this time, no padlock. Just a faint chalk mark 3 lines like a crow's foot. That wasn't one of ours. We went down anyway. Inside, it was humid and too quiet. No echo, no leaks, too clean. I told them to stay close. Gustav placed his hand on Leo's shoulder. A final gesture, maybe. At 300 meters in, the light cut out. Just died. No flicker. No warning. I whispered, "Stay still." Then came the voice. "Don't move." It wasn't in German. It wasn't Soviet. It was American. My stomach dropped. A flashlight clicked on white, cold, official. Behind it, Van Doren. He looked calm, not smug, not gloating, just tired. "You weren't supposed to bring the boy," he said, like he was correcting a detail in a form. Gustav stepped forward. "He's not negotiable." Van Doren raised a radio. "Command, 3 present, 1 unlisted. Proceeding with capture." I moved before I could think. 1 shot. Silencer muffled the blast, but the tunnel amplified the silence that followed. Van Doren fell sideways. Still holding the radio. Leo screamed. I grabbed both of them and ran. Wrong direction. We moved deeper, into the dark, trying to find the second shaft, the unused one, barely mapped, half collapsed. We didn't have time to reach the main exit. Reinforcements were coming. I could feel them in the vibration of the concrete. Then came the dogs, barking, distant but gaining, and flashlights. Multiple. I pushed Gustav ahead. "You know the shaft." He didn't argue. He grabbed Leo's hand and turned left. I covered our tracks, left 2 phosphorus traps. Bought us maybe 30 seconds. Then, I followed. We reached the auxiliary shaft. Narrow, vertical, wet with condensation. I boosted Leo first, then Gustav. I waited, counted. 10 seconds. And the shots came, muffled, sharp, echoing. I climbed. Halfway up, the hatch slammed open. Gustav screamed something I couldn't understand. Then gunfire. Right above me. I felt the heat on my cheek. I let go. Dropped everything. Spun. My flashlight cracked against the wall. The tunnel turned sideways. When I came to, it was quiet again. Too quiet. I climbed back up. The hatch was open. No one there. No Gustav. No Leo. Just a scarf, hanging from the edge like a flag that had surrendered. Too late. And blood. Not much, but enough to know someone didn't walk out clean. I stood there, frozen. And that was the last time I saw either of them. Alive. Or free. They told me not to include names in the report. Focus on outcomes, they said. Language should be technical, not emotional. So I wrote what they wanted. Extraction attempt compromised. 1 hostile neutralized. 2 assets presumed detained. Operatives sustained minor injuries during retreat. That's how Gustav became a data point. Leo? He didn't even make the page. The debrief at Langley was colder than the tunnel. Fluorescent lights. Coffee no one drank. A man in a gray tie reading my file like it was a blueprint of disappointment. You deviated from protocol. I adapted. I said, you were instructed not to proceed with unauthorized variables. He was a child. He didn't blink. Just underlined something in his notes. No reprimand. No commendation. Just paperwork. I asked if Gustav had been identified. Unconfirmed, they said. Likely detained by Stasi. And that was it. Number. Follow-up. No rescue protocol. No classified discussions behind heavy doors. Just silence. A few weeks later, I was reassigned. Belgium. Then Vienna. Then back home. The memory of Gustav faded into coded memos and shredded notes. Until one night, years later, when I found myself sitting alone with the radio, tuning into static just to feel something. Then came the photograph. Delivered by mail. No return address. Plain envelope. Inside. An image. Black and white. Grainy. Man older, thinner, hunched carrying a bucket through what looked like a labor camp. Barbed wire in the background. His face swollen. Beard unkempt, but the eyes. It was him. Gustav. I wanted to believe it wasn't real. That it was faked. That the Stasi were playing mind games from beyond the grave. But no one else knew about the scarf, and he was wearing it, or something that looked just like it. I stared at that photo for hours. He hadn't died. In the tunnel, he'd been taken. Survived. That's what shattered me most, because if he survived, then everything I told myself to sleep at night was a lie. The inevitable loss. The compromised plan. The idea that I had no choice. I had a choice. And I left him. In the weeks that followed, I tried tracking the origin of the envelope. Nothing. No fingerprints. No postal mark. Just the name Krongmer, typed on the inside flap. I didn't show it to anyone. What would I say? That a ghost had mailed me guilt? I burned the photo 2 years later. Not because I wanted to forget, because I knew I never would, and because sometimes carrying the memory is easier than carrying the proof. There's a sound Langley makes at 3 in the morning. It's not the humming of machines or the distant shuffle of night staff. It's the silence of a building designed to pretend nothing happened. That's where they sent me after Berlin to file reports, decode intercepted chatter, and sit in briefings that didn't mention names, especially not his. No one said Gustav. No one said Leo. Not once. Their absence was louder than any reprimand. At first, I asked questions, softly, in corridors, to handlers I'd worked with for years. You ever hear anything? Back from East Berlin? Shrugs. Nothing concrete. One agent leaned in and whispered, if they're not talking about it, it's because they don't want to. That's when I understood. Gustav hadn't just disappeared from the East. He'd been deleted from the West. My final report was logged under the generic heading, Operation 408E status. Terminated. Inconclusive extraction. 3 lines. 10 months. Of work. 2 human beings reduced to a file number and an ellipsis. They moved my desk, assigned me to Soviet agricultural memos, coded updates about wheat exports and beet production. That was my punishment, or maybe my consolation prize. I was invisible. Again. One day, Van Doren's name popped up in an internal memo. He'd been reassigned to Vienna, temporarily. I stared at that line for minutes. Heart beating out of sync. He survived the tunnel, which meant he was never meant to die there, which meant he was never rogue, which meant everything I suspected was true. Langley knew. They'd used me, set the trap, sacrificed Gustav, or maybe negotiated him. A trade, a delay, a message. I filed a resignation request that same month. It was denied. We still need your eyes, they said, But they never looked me in mind, so I stayed. For a while, read files. Buried myself in bureaucratic fog. Learned to sleep in pieces. Until one night, years later, I found a stack of redacted files marked Archive Hold, non-operational. I shouldn't have touched them. But curiosity rots slower than guilt. Inside, I found something strange. A hand-drawn diagram of the same tunnel we used at Bernauer Strage, but annotated in a different hand, different ink, and next to it, a phrase in pencil. He warned you, and you went anyway. No signature, no date, just those words. I don't know if it was Gustav or someone else, but it was enough to know that Langley had seen it all and decided none of it was worth remembering. I'd been out of the service for almost a decade when the envelope arrived. No. Return address. No seal. Just my name typed, not handwritten, in a font that reminded me of old typewriters and darker rooms. Inside, no letter, no explanation. Just a photo. Gustav. It was him again. Older than the last image. Thinner. Wearing a work uniform. With torn sleeves. In the background, guard towers. Barbed wire. Eastern pines, but this time, he wasn't carrying anything. He was looking straight at the camera. Straight at me. It shouldn't have been possible. He was supposed to be gone. Transferred. Dead. Forgotten. But there he was, staring like the last chapter hadn't closed. Like he knew I'd see it. Like he was waiting for me to. I turned the photo over. One sentence in faint pencil. You could have said no. I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour. No clock. No movement. Just the sound of my own breath scraping the inside of my throat. I hadn't told anyone about Gustav in years. Not even during those brief, whiskey-fueled nights when secrets came out like blood. And yet, someone had tracked me down. Chosen that photo. That sentence, that moment. The paper smelled like old books and mildew. It had been kept somewhere for a long time. And whoever sent it didn't want me to forget. I thought about who it could be. A Stasi relic? A defector? Some ex-operative cleaning out old drawers? Or maybe it was him. Somehow, maybe he was still alive. Living in the quiet corners of some forgotten place. Mailing pieces of himself to the people who failed him. Or maybe I was just losing my mind. I burned the photo 2 days later. It felt cowardly, but I did it anyway. Because some truths don't fade. They haunt. Later that week, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over 20 years. Linra. Her voice was hoarse, barely there. She didn't ask how I'd been. She just said, "You got the envelope?" I froze. "How did you?" I told them to wait until you stopped lying to yourself. And then she hung up. That was the last time I heard her voice. I tried tracing the number. Disconnected. The next day, I went to the library, looked up Soviet-era prison records. Nothing on Gustav. Nothing on Leo. Nothing but ash and silence. But I did find one reference. A footnote in a thesis paper badly translated, likely overlooked. It mentioned a dissident physicist forced to develop water purification systems in a labor camp. Near Ruggen. No name. No year. Just this line. Known to speak to himself in English. Often repeats the word, friend. That was enough to know the silence had never been empty. It has been. Waiting. It's raining again. Has been all night. Not the dramatic kind, just a steady, tired drizzle that seeps through the cracks like it belongs there. I'm sitting by the window in a chair that no longer remembers my shape. This apartment isn't mine anymore. Hasn't been for years. I'm just borrowing space now. Time too, probably. I've rehearsed this confession 100 ways. With defiance, with regret, with numbness. But it always ends the same, with silence I can't explain. Say we did what had to be done. that Berlin was a city of necessity, not choices. But every time I see a blue scarf or smell wet concrete, I remember a name I wasn't allowed to write. Gustav, the man I studied, manipulated, befriended, and then left. And Leo. God. I still don't know if he ever had a last name. Maybe I was just a pawn too, but pawns bleed the same as kings. That tunnel still lives in my sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear him yell my name before the hatch slams shut. I tell myself I didn't have time, that the operation failed, that someone higher up decided it for me. But the truth? I chose not to go back. I chose me. And that's the thing I carry. Not the missions, not the medals I never wore, just that one moment when someone needed me to be more than a role, and I stayed in character. It's almost morning. I can hear the neighbor's dog scratching at the door. I haven't spoken to anyone in 2 weeks. No one knocks here anymore, but sometimes when it rains like this, I hear a knock that isn't real. 3 slow taps, like a memory testing the lock. Maybe it's him, maybe it's just my guilt, but either way, I get up. Every time, because I owe someone the dignity of an answer, even if it's too late to give it, even if all that's left is this voice on tape, even if I'm the last one who remembers. That part, I never told anyone, not even her. If you listen to the whole story, thank you for sticking with me till the end. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing the things they don't put in the books.